Hi class, we're going to talk about in this lecture knowing your audience, or also called audience analysis, which is extremely important in presentations. And as a basis, I'm going to use a set of slides from my favorite organization, Toastmasters, but I'm going to put my own spin on it and bring in some aspects of your class and the class assignments. Speaking of which, you have 3 presentation assignments in this class, 2 individual and 1 virtual team presentation. And even though you may or may not be presenting these presentations live, it's still important to know who your audience is. I hope that you do present them live. That's certainly an option open to you, but I didn't want to make it a requirement because of the difficulties of scheduling that with Adobe Connect. But you certainly do have the option of scheduling doing your presentation live via Adobe Connect, or you could also video your presentation. That's another option. But you also have the choices of a slideshow like this one, a narrated one, or even a slideshow without narration, as long as it can stand on its own without the narration. But when you do have an opportunity to do a presentation with a live audience, it's extremely important to understand and know your audience. Speakers want to share knowledge and move an audience to share their viewpoint. So to do this, they must send their message in such a way that it's easy for the audience to receive and understand it. The speaker must know who the audience is and fine-tune how the message is sent to the audience so it will succeed. Now, when it comes to analyzing the audience, there are a number of variables that you're going to want to take into consideration. There's always going to be diversity among a group of individuals. You're very rarely going to have an audience that's completely homogeneous, but a typical audience has several characteristics that distinguish it from other audiences. So consider the following variables when tailoring a speech to the interests of an audience. First of all, age range. When a speaker knows what kinds of events the audience has experienced, he or she is able to use statements that are meaningful to that audience. These statements help the speaker to establish why his or her ideas are relevant and of interest to the audience. Now, when I think of events that an audience has experienced, I think about my own generation, the baby boomer generation, and the kind of frame of reference we always think about is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So if I were speaking to an audience of people my own age, I might refer to Kennedy or might refer to the assassination, and the audience would understand exactly what I was talking about and would have experienced the same things and emotions. Whereas if I used the same references with a much younger audience, it wouldn't have the same effect. I would probably use something like 9/11 with a much younger audience. And then you want to think about your male to female ratio. Depending on the organization or situation, an audience may be primarily or exclusively composed of one gender or the other. And if that's the case, select the language, examples, and line of reasoning accordingly. Effectively delivering a message means gearing the speech to the specific needs and interests of an audience. You will probably also want to consider their occupational and economic status. A speaker can assume that an audience comprised of persons sharing a specific occupation has a certain level of specialized knowledge. Using professional jargon with such an audience would be appropriate. Using jargon or referring to specialized knowledge that's unfamiliar to the audience can be confusing and could be perceived as arrogant. You know, you are nurses, you have a whole language that's exclusive to nursing, and you wouldn't want to use that in with an audience that's not in nursing or doesn't understand the healthcare field. Economic levels also help to define an audience. A speech topic that appeals to an affluent audience would be less likely to appeal to an audience of middle-class manual laborers, for example. But whatever the audience or economic status of the audience, the speaker's goal is to ensure his or her message is perceived as significant to the audience's lives and experience. Educational background. The educational status of an audience can make a significant difference in a speaker's approach, wording, and focus. Avoid being perceived as patronizing by keeping the speech level just a bit higher than that of the listeners, but be cautious of using language that exceeds the audience's understanding. Political orientation. Some groups pride themselves on being open-minded, but others take firm positions, especially in our very polarized climate today. Be aware of an audience's general attitude when deciding whether the speech focuses on a topic or merely refers to it briefly. And finally, leisure activities. Awareness of an audience's extracurricular hobbies and activities help speakers further understand the audience's interests and needs. Now, these considerations for keeping the audience's attention are not going to be particularly relevant to the assignment presentations you're going to be doing for this class, because you're not going to be doing them in front of a live audience in a room. But presumably you will be in that situation in the future. You've probably been in that situation in the past. So it's important to think about these things so that you know kind of what your audience is experiencing in terms of the physical environment, because that helps you tailor your message, helps you keep yourself and the audience comfortable. So you're going to want to think about things like room acoustics, seating, lighting, temperature control, outside noise, and other possible distractions. And when selecting the best way to hold your audience's attention, also consider time of day. So important, because, for example, after a meal, after lunch, or after dinner, audiences need a lot of stimulation, because you know how sleepy you often feel after you've had a big meal. You also want to think about concurrent events or activities that might be going on at the same venue, and the practicality of breaks for lengthy presentations. In many ways, analyzing an audience, the real meat of it is understanding what the audience needs to know, wants to know. So you kind of go on a little discovery mission to find out what the audience is looking for, what they would like to learn from you, and figure out which approaches have worked before and which have not. If you're speaking at a conference, for example, you could ask the event host what the audience already knows. You could scan any publications specific to that audience. If you're speaking at some sort of an organization, a club that has officers, you could contact the local officers. Consult references on the internet and in periodicals. And talk with someone who has either spoken to the group before or is an actual member. In conclusion, a speaker does not need to adjust his or her own opinions or talk only about what the audience already agrees with to effectively send a message. But the more a speaker knows about the people in the audience, their backgrounds, their interests, their preferences, the easier it will be to establish the best way to deliver a specific message to a particular group. Researching an audience in advance also will help the speaker feel knowledgeable and confident. Nervous tension will convert itself into positive energy. Instead of being disabled by fears of the unknown, a speaker will be ready to convert a room full of strangers into a captivated and speaker-friendly audience.